The silence that followed Kethra Prime's destruction lasted exactly 17 minutes, and then the galaxy exploded into chaos as every major power scrambled to understand what had just happened. The Kethran Empire that had ruled half of known space for over a millennium had been decapitated in an instant by a species that most beings had considered primitive savages. Admiral Vextar's surviving fleet hung motionless in space while their commanders tried to process the reality that their homeworld and 12 billion of their people had simply ceased to exist. Captain Jake Morrison received surrender offers from 6 different Kethran ship commanders within the first hour after the attack, and each message carried the same desperate tone of beings who had witnessed the impossible. The alien warriors who had been preparing to exterminate humanity now begged for mercy from the species they had planned to wipe out. The complete reversal of power dynamics left Jake struggling to find appropriate responses to offers of unconditional surrender. The galactic communication networks that had been broadcasting humanity's expected destruction now carried emergency bulletins from every corner of known space as governments and military leaders tried to understand the new reality. The Zelani Trade Federation immediately recalled all vessels from human space, while the Brutak warrior clans sent formal requests for non-aggression pacts. Species that had never bothered to learn human names suddenly wanted detailed information about Earth's defensive capabilities. Ambassador Lisa Barnes found herself in the unprecedented position of receiving diplomatic overtures from civilizations that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant just days earlier. The same alien leaders who had laughed at her petition for Galactic Council membership now sent urgent messages requesting immediate meetings to discuss peaceful relations. The shift from contempt to fear had happened so quickly that many species were still struggling to adjust their policies. Admiral Kate Sullivan addressed the reformed Galactic Council from a secure facility on Earth, and her words reached billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. She spoke with the measured calm of someone who understood that humanity now carried a terrible responsibility along with their newfound power. The demonstration of Project Daybreak's capabilities had been necessary for survival, but the moral cost would weigh on human consciousness for generations to come. The Admiral revealed that humanity had developed quantum tunneling weapons not for conquest, but as a deterrent against species that viewed genocide as entertainment. Earth's scientists had spent 30 years in isolation working on theoretical physics problems that the galaxy's established powers had never bothered to explore. The result was a weapon system that could destroy any target anywhere in the galaxy with perfect precision and unstoppable force. Dr. Alan Brooks stood before the assembled representatives and explained the basic principles behind Project Daybreak, while carefully avoiding details that could allow other species to replicate the technology. The weapon created controlled singularities by manipulating quantum fields in ways that required enormous energy inputs and mathematical precision beyond most civilizations' capabilities. The galaxy had discovered that humanity's understanding of physics had advanced far beyond their apparent technological level. The Kethran survivors formally surrendered their remaining fleet to Captain Morrison and requested safe passage to colony worlds that could accommodate refugees from their destroyed homeworld. Jake found himself in the surreal position of accepting the surrender of beings who could have easily destroyed his ship just hours earlier. The complete collapse of Kethran morale demonstrated that even the galaxy's most warlike species could be broken by sufficient demonstration of superior force. Lieutenant Ben Clark, coordinated the massive logistics operation required to process thousands of alien surrender requests while maintaining security protocols that protected Earth's remaining secrets. The Liberty had become the de facto headquarters for humanity's first contact with dozens of species that were desperately eager to avoid sharing Kethra Prime's fate. The ship's communication systems handled more diplomatic traffic in one day than Earth had processed in 50 years. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Torres supervised the shutdown of the Liberty's quantum core and marveled at the technology that had just changed the balance of power throughout known space. The device that had served as a targeting relay for the galaxy's most powerful weapon was now being carefully secured to prevent any possibility of alien interference. Humanity's technological advantages would remain closely guarded secrets for the foreseeable future. President Helen Carter announced that Earth would accept membership in the reformed Galactic Council, but only under conditions that guaranteed human independence and security. The species that had once mocked humanity's petition now competed to offer the most favorable terms for peaceful coexistence. Fear had accomplished what diplomacy could never achieve and established humanity as the galaxy's newest superpower. The moral implications of destroying an entire world weighed heavily on every human involved in Project Daybreak and counseling. Services were established to help personnel cope with their role in the greatest act of destruction in galactic history. Dr. Brooks retired from active research and spent his remaining years writing about the ethical responsibilities that came with advanced weapons technology. The scientific community struggled to balance pride in their achievement with horror at its consequences. Captain Morrison resigned his commission after overseeing the peaceful transition of Kethran refugees to suitable colony worlds and accepted appointment as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. His experience commanding the vessel that had guided humanity's ultimate weapon made him uniquely qualified to represent his species in a galaxy that now viewed humans with a mixture of respect and terror. The final hours of the ultimatum ticked away with agonizing slowness, and Captain Jake Morrison watched the Kethran fleet begin its advance toward human space. Admiral Vexistar had positioned his massive armada in perfect formation with the Dominions, Wrath leading nearly 3,000 warships in what he called humanity's final lesson. The alien leader broadcast his intentions across the galaxy, while billions of Kethrans celebrated the coming victory on their homeworld. Kethra Prime sparkled like a jewel in the darkness of space, and its 12 billion inhabitants went about their daily routines with complete confidence in their empire's invincibility. The planet's surface teemed with cities that had stood for thousands of years and orbital platforms that coordinated military operations across half the galaxy. Not a single Kethran imagined that their world faced any threat from the primitive species they were about to exterminate. Dr. Alan Brooks stood in the control room of Project Daybreak, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, and felt the weight of human history pressing down on his shoulders. The weapon system stretched for miles through underground caverns and represented 30 years of scientific advancement that the galaxy had never seen. Quantum tunneling technology had been theoretical when the project began, but human desperation had turned theory into devastating reality. The targeting computers showed a perfect lock on Kethra Prime's quantum coordinates, and the probe data from Captain Morrison's mission had provided precision beyond their most optimistic projections. Every calculation had been checked and rechecked by teams of physicists who understood that failure meant the extinction of their entire species. The weapon would fire automatically when the UES Liberty reached the optimal relay position. Lieutenant Ben Clark monitored the Liberty's approach to the designated coordinates while keeping one eye on the advancing Kethran fleet. The enemy ships moved with the confident precision of predators who had never faced serious opposition, and their formation showed no concern for defensive measures. Admiral Vexitar apparently considered human capabilities so insignificant that standard military precautions were unnecessary. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Torres finally understood her ship's true purpose when Captain Morrison addressed the crew over the internal communication system. The Liberty had been built specifically to serve as a quantum relay for the most powerful weapon in human history, and every member of the crew was about to play a direct role in their species' survival. The ship's experimental core was not a propulsion system, but a quantum tunneling device that would guide Project Daybreak's energy across impossible distances. The revelation struck the crew like a physical blow, and Amy could see the shock and fear in her teammates' faces as they realized what was about to happen. They had signed up for a diplomatic mission, but found themselves at the center of a weapon test that would either save humanity or doom them all. The responsibility was almost too much to bear, but every person aboard the Liberty understood that retreat was no longer an option. Admiral Vexitar began his final broadcast to the galaxy from the bridge of his flagship, and his words carried the absolute confidence of someone who had never known defeat. He spoke of the Kethran Empire's 1,000-year reign and promised that humanity's destruction would serve as an example to any other species that might consider challenging galactic order. The alien leader's forearms gestured dramatically as he declared the beginning of what he called the final cleansing. The broadcast reached every corner of known space, and billions of beings across hundreds of worlds watched what they expected to be a brief and entertaining military demonstration. Galactic news networks provided expert commentary, while bookmakers adjusted their odds based on the latest intelligence reports. The universal consensus was that human resistance would collapse within hours of the first Kethran attack. Dr. Brooks received confirmation that the Liberty had reached the optimal relay position and initiated the final countdown sequence for Project Daybreak. Massive power generators throughout Earth's electrical grid began channeling energy into the weapon system, and the planet's lights dimmed as every available watt flowed toward the underground facility. The quantum tunneling process would require more energy than humanity had ever used for any single purpose. Captain Morrison felt his ship shudder as the quantum core reached maximum output and realized that the Liberty was now serving as a guidance system for forces beyond normal comprehension. The targeting data flowed through the ship's computer, systems in streams of information that would have been impossible to process without the vessel's specialized equipment. Everything humanity had learned about quantum physics was being tested in real time. The Kethran fleet continued its advance, while Admiral Vexitar provided running commentary on his species' military superiority and described the various methods they would use to eliminate human resistance. He spoke of orbital bombardments that would crack continental plates and atmospheric processors that would make Earth uninhabitable for any surviving humans. The aliens' casual discussion of genocide revealed the true nature of his empire's expansion methods. Dr. Brooks watched the energy levels climb toward critical thresholds and knew that the moment of truth was approaching with unstoppable momentum. Project Daybreak would either justify 30 years of secret research or prove that humanity had wasted its final chance for survival on an impossible dream. The quantum tunneling effect would create a controlled singularity in Kethra Prime's planetary core and compress the entire world into a sphere of super-dense matter. The weapon fired with no visible sign or dramatic countdown, and Dr. Brooks felt anticlimactic disappointment as status lights simply changed from red to green. Quantum tunneling occurred instantaneously across any distance, and the effect should already be taking place in the heart of the Kethran homeworld. Success or failure would be determined by events happening thousands of light years away in a star system that most humans had never heard of. Admiral Vextar was in the middle of describing humanity's coming extinction when the first reports reached his flagship from monitoring stations throughout Kethran space. The initial messages were confused and contradictory, but they all contained references to impossible gravitational readings from the direction of the homeworld. The alien leader cut short his broadcast and demanded immediate clarification from his intelligence officers. The truth became clear within minutes, as long-range sensors confirmed what should have been impossible according to every known law of physics. Kethra Prime was collapsing in on itself, with gravitational forces that defied explanation, and the planet's surface was already disappearing beneath layers of compressed matter. 12 billion Kethrans died in seconds as their world transformed into a perfect sphere of dense material that had once been an entire civilization. The galactic networks broadcasting Admiral Vextar's victory speech suddenly switched to emergency bulletins as news of Kethra Prime's destruction spread throughout known space. Observers who had been expecting to watch humanity's extinction instead witnessed the impossible sight of an entire world being compressed into nothingness by forces that no one could explain. The Kethran Empire's capital had simply ceased to exist. Captain Morrison received confirmation of the weapon's success through encrypted channels from Earth and felt a mixture of relief and horror that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Project Daybreak had worked exactly as designed, but the cost of victory was an entire world filled with billions of innocent beings. The moral implications of what they had accomplished would take years to fully process. The surviving Kethran fleet reacted to their homeworld's destruction with complete shock, and Admiral Vextar's confident broadcasts gave way to panicked communications between ship commanders who could not believe what their sensors were telling them. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for centuries had lost its heart in an instant, and their invincible military machine suddenly faced the reality of fighting an enemy that could destroy planets with weapons they did not understand. Lieutenant. Clark watched the enemy fleet's formation begin to break apart as individual ship commanders received news of their homeworld's fate and realized that their families and entire civilization had been wiped out while they were preparing to destroy humanity. The psychological impact of losing Kethra Prime was almost as devastating as the physical destruction, and many Kethran vessels simply stopped moving as their crews struggled to process the impossible. The galaxy fell silent as billions of beings, across hundreds of worlds, tried to understand what they had just witnessed, and the casual entertainment of watching humanity's destruction transformed into stunned disbelief at the demonstration of power that defied every known scientific principle. The tiny human ship that had been mocked at the Galactic Council had apparently just destroyed the most powerful civilization in known space with a single devastating attack. The UES Liberty dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Kethran territory, and Captain Jake Morrison felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared at the massive alien fleet assembled before them. Hundreds of Kethran warships filled the view screen, and each one was large enough to carry his entire vessel in its cargo bay. The flagship Dominion's Wrath dominated the center of the formation like a dark metal mountain floating in space. Admiral Vextar's response to their arrival came within minutes, and his voice carried the same arrogant contempt Jake remembered from the council chambers. The Kethran leader seemed genuinely amused that humans had appeared in his territory and suggested they had come to surrender before the real fighting began. Jake forced his voice to remain steady as he requested a face-to-face meeting aboard the flagship. The request caught Admiral Vextar by surprise, and Jake could hear alien laughter in the background of the transmission. The idea that primitive humans would dare board a Kethran warship apparently struck the aliens as hilarious entertainment. After several minutes of discussion among the Kethran command staff, Admiral Vexatar agreed to the meeting, and Jake felt the first part of his desperate plan fall into place. Ambassador Lisa Barnes joined Jake in the shuttle bay as they prepared. To board the alien flagship, and her diplomatic training helped mask the fear they both felt. The Kethrans had agreed to the meeting because they viewed it as an opportunity to humiliate humanity one final time before beginning the cleansing operation. They had no idea that human scientists had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Lieutenant Ben Clark monitored the shuttle's approach to the Dominion's wrath and marveled at the size of the alien vessel. The ship's hull stretched for miles in every direction and contained enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Weapon ports the size of city blocks tracked their small shuttle while alien fighters swarmed around them like angry insects. The docking bay that received their shuttle was larger than most Earth spaceports, and Jake felt completely insignificant as they walked through corridors designed for beings twice human height. Kethran guards escorted them through the ship's maze-like interior, while alien crew members stopped their work to stare at the primitive humans who had dared enter their domain. Admiral Vextar waited for them in a conference room that could have held 1,000 people, and his forearms gestured dismissively as the human delegation entered. The alien leader towered over them even while seated, and Jake realized he was looking at a being who had never known defeat in over 2 centuries of warfare. The Kethran's scaled hide bore scars from countless battles, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. Ambassador Barnes began the formal negotiations with practiced diplomatic language, while Jake quietly activated a microscopic probe hidden in his uniform's collar. The device was no larger than a grain of sand and contained quantum sensors capable of mapping the unique energy signatures that surrounded Kethran space. Every star system had its own quantum fingerprint, and the probe would need several hours to gather the precise coordinates required for Project Daybreak. The negotiations proceeded exactly as Jake expected, with Admiral Vextar rejecting every human proposal and demanding complete surrender. The alien leader spoke of humanity's coming extinction with casual indifference and described plans to turn Earth into a Kethran colony world once the current inhabitants had been eliminated. Ambassador Barnes maintained her composure throughout the discussion, but Jake could see the anger building behind her diplomatic mask. The probe transmitted its data in microscopic bursts that would be undetectable to Kethran sensors, and Jake felt a mixture of relief and terror as the plan continued to unfold. Earth's scientists had spent 30 years developing the quantum mapping technology, and this would be its first real-world test. Everything humanity had worked toward depended on a device smaller than a pebble gathering information from the heart of enemy territory. Admiral Vexatar seemed to enjoy the hopeless situation and spent considerable time describing the various ways Kethran forces would demonstrate their superiority over human military capabilities. He spoke of orbital bombardments that would turn human cities into glass, and ground assaults that would hunt down any survivors who tried to hide. The alien's casual cruelty revealed the true nature of his empire's expansion across the galaxy. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Torres monitored the Liberty's systems while her captain was aboard the enemy flagship and noticed unusual energy fluctuations from the ship's experimental core. The quantum device had been installed during the vessel's construction, but its true purpose remained classified beyond her security clearance. The power readings suggested something far more complex than a simple propulsion system. Dr. Alan Brooks received the probe's data transmission on Earth and immediately began processing the quantum coordinates through Project Daybreak's targeting computers. The information was more detailed than their best theoretical models had predicted, and he felt cautiously optimistic about the weapon system's chances of success. The Kethrin homeworld's quantum signature was now mapped with precision that would have been impossible without the probe's close-range scans. The meeting aboard the Dominion's Wrath continued for 3 hours, while the probe completed its data collection, and Admiral Vextar grew increasingly impatient with human attempts at negotiation. He finally declared that humanity had wasted enough of his valuable time and gave them a final 24-hour ultimatum. Human forces would withdraw beyond Earth's solar system or face immediate destruction by the assembled Kethrin fleet. Ambassador Barnes made one last attempt to find common ground, but Admiral Vextar dismissed her words with contempt. He suggested that humans spend their remaining hours preparing for death because the Kethrin Empire showed no mercy to species that refused to accept their proper place in the galactic order. The meeting ended with formal rejection of all human proposals, and Jake felt the weight of his species' fate as they returned to their shuttle. The journey back to the Liberty gave Jake time to process everything he had witnessed aboard the enemy flagship, and he realized that conventional diplomacy would never work with beings who viewed genocide as entertainment. The Kethrins had ruled the galaxy for so long that they could not imagine any challenge to their absolute authority. Their arrogance would either save humanity or doom them all. Lieutenant Clark welcomed his captain back aboard the Liberty and reported that Kethrin forces were continuing to mass throughout the star system. Intelligence scans suggested that over 2,000 alien warships were now positioned for the assault on human space, and more vessels were arriving every hour. The enemy fleet represented enough firepower to sterilize every human world in a matter of days. Amy Torres noticed that the ship's quantum core was now operating at much higher energy levels than during their journey to Kethrin space, and she began to suspect that the Liberty's true purpose was far different from its official diplomatic mission. The energy patterns matched theoretical descriptions of quantum tunneling systems, but such technology was supposed to be impossible with current human science. Dr. Brooks completed his analysis of the probe data and transmitted the final targeting coordinates to Project Daybreak's control systems. The weapon was now ready for deployment, and would fire automatically when the Liberty reached the optimal position relative to the target. Everything depended on Captain Morrison's ability to maintain his ship's position during the critical moments when the quantum tunnel opened. The Kethrin ultimatum countdown continued while both sides prepared for what everyone expected to be a very short war. Alien news networks began broadcasting preliminary coverage of the coming cleansing operation, and bookmakers throughout the galaxy offered odds on various aspects of humanity's destruction. The consensus among galactic observers was that human resistance would collapse within hours of the first Kethrin attack. Admiral Vextar addressed his assembled fleet commanders and outlined plans for the systematic destruction of human civilization. The operation would begin with orbital bombardments of major population centers, followed by ground invasions to eliminate any survivors. He estimated that the entire campaign would require less than 1 standard galactic week to complete. Jake Morrison stared out at the massive enemy fleet and wondered if humanity's desperate gambit would actually work. Project Daybreak represented the most advanced weapon system his species had ever developed, but it had never been tested against a target of this magnitude. In less than 24 hours, they would discover whether human science could match Kethrin military might, or whether their species was about to join the countless others that had fallen before the Empire's expansion. President Helen Carter stared at the holographic display showing Earth's defensive positions and felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. The emergency session had been called within hours of receiving Captain Morrison's report from the Galactic Council, and every face around the table showed the same grim determination. The Kethran ultimatum gave humanity 72 hours to abandon every colony beyond Earth or face complete destruction. General Paul Reed spread tactical assessments across the conference table, while Admiral Kate Sullivan reviewed fleet positions on her datapad. Earth's combined military forces included 300 vessels of various sizes, but even their most optimistic projections showed impossible odds against the Kethran Empire. The alien fleet reportedly numbered in the thousands, with individual ships larger than Earth's biggest space stations. Dr. Alan Brooks sat quietly at the far end of the table, reviewing classified files that few people in the room were cleared to see. As head of the Advanced Research Division, he had spent the last 30 years working on projects that pushed the boundaries of human science. Project Daybreak had consumed most of his adult life, and now it might be humanity's only hope for survival. Admiral Sullivan spoke first, and her voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had commanded fleets in 3 different conflicts. She outlined Earth's defensive capabilities with brutal honesty and made it clear that conventional warfare against the Kethrans would result in humanity's complete annihilation. Their ships were simply too powerful and too numerous for any traditional military response to succeed. General Reed disagreed with the assessment and argued that humanity's ground forces could make any invasion costly enough to discourage Kethran expansion into human space. He pointed to historical examples of smaller forces defeating larger armies through superior tactics and determination. President Carter listened to both arguments, but knew that neither option offered real hope against an enemy capable of destroying entire planets from orbit. Dr. Brooks finally spoke when the military options had been exhausted, and his words changed the entire direction of the meeting. He revealed that Project Daybreak had reached operational status 3 months earlier and could theoretically engage targets at any distance within the galaxy. The weapon required precise quantum coordinates and enormous amounts of energy, but early tests had exceeded all expectations. The scientist explained that humanity's 50 years of isolation following first contact had not been wasted, and Earth's research programs had made breakthrough discoveries in theoretical physics that the galactic community had never imagined possible. Project Daybreak represented the culmination of decades of work by thousands of researchers who had labored in absolute secrecy. President Carter asked the obvious question about whether the weapon could actually stop the Kethran Empire, and Dr. Brooks admitted that field testing had been limited to asteroid targets in remote star systems. The full-scale deployment against a planetary target would be the first real test of the system's capabilities, but computer models suggested success was possible. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison guided the UES Liberty through hyperspace toward Earth and tried to process everything he had witnessed at the Galactic Council. The alien species had treated humanity like an amusing curiosity rather than a legitimate threat, and their casual dismissal of human military capabilities had been almost insulting. Admiral Vextar had spoken of cleansing human space with the same tone someone might use to discuss pest control. Lieutenant Ben Clark ran continuous scans of the surrounding space and reported no signs of pursuit from the alien fleet stationed at the Council headquarters. The Kethrans apparently considered humanity so insignificant that they had not bothered to monitor the Liberty's departure. Jake found their arrogance both offensive and potentially useful, since enemies who underestimated their opponents often made critical mistakes. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Torres continued her maintenance work on the ship's experimental quantum core and wondered why such an advanced system had been installed on what should have been a simple diplomatic vessel. The power readings were unlike anything she had encountered in 15 years of military service, and the Corps' energy output seemed far beyond the needs of the Liberty's standard systems. The ship's true purpose remained classified above her. Security clearance, but Amy could tell that the Liberty was much more than it appeared. Hidden compartments contained equipment she did not recognize, and several crew members had been assigned to duties that made no sense for a diplomatic mission. Captain Morrison clearly knew more than he was telling, but orders were orders, and she trusted his judgment completely. Back on Earth, the emergency session continued for 18 straight hours as government officials and military leaders tried to find some way to avoid the coming war. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Kethrin fleet was already mobilizing for what their leaders called a cleansing operation, and spy satellites detected massive troop movements throughout Kethrin space. Dr. Brooks presented detailed technical specifications for Project Daybreak to the assembled group and explained that the weapon could only be fired once due to the enormous energy requirements. The system would drain every power plant on Earth and leave the planet defenseless for weeks while the generators recharged. Success or failure would depend on a single shot that had to count more than any weapon in human history. The targeting system required a relay ship positioned within 1 light year of the intended target, and the Liberty had been specifically modified for this purpose during its construction 5 years earlier. Captain Morrison and his crew had been chosen for the mission without knowing their true role, and their ship contained quantum equipment that would serve as the guidance system for humanity's ultimate weapon. President Carter made the decision that would change the course of human history and authorize the deployment of Project Daybreak against the Kethrin homeworld. The moral implications of destroying an entire planet weighed heavily on everyone in the room, but the alternative was the extinction of the human species. Sometimes survival required choices that no civilized being wanted to make. Admiral Sullivan transmitted new orders to Captain Morrison while the Liberty was still in hyperspace, and Jake received the sealed instructions with growing amazement. His ship had been selected to serve as the targeting relay for a weapon system he had never heard of, and his crew would play a direct role in what could be humanity's final gambit. The galaxy's most powerful empire had declared war on humanity, and expected the conflict to last only days or weeks at most. Alien bookmakers were already taking bets on casualty numbers while Kethrin's citizens celebrated the coming victory over the primitive species from Earth. They had no idea that the tiny human ship they had mocked contained the key to their empires: destruction. Dr. Brooks began final preparations for Project Daybreak, while technicians across Earth readied the massive power systems required for the weapon's deployment. Everything humanity had learned about quantum physics and energy manipulation would be tested in the next 72 hours, and failure would mean the end of human civilization. The Kethrins continued their preparations for war while treating the entire conflict as an entertaining diversion from their normal routines, and Admiral Vextar issued proclamations about the glorious cleansing that would remove the human stain from galactic space. He had no way of knowing that his arrogance had just sealed his empire's fate. The massive space station hung in the void like a steel city among the stars, and Captain Jake Morrison had never seen anything so big in his life. The Galactic Council's headquarters stretched for miles in every direction, with towers and docking, bays that could hold 1,000 ships the size of his own vessel. The UES Liberty looked like a toy next to the giant warships already docked there, and Jake felt a knot form in his stomach as he guided his small frigate toward the assigned berth. Ambassador Lisa Barnes stood beside him on the bridge, watching the alien ships through the main screen, and her face showed the same worry Jake felt inside. They had trained for this moment for 3 years, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of seeing so many different species gathered in one place. The Kethran Empire's flagship dominated the central docking ring, and its dark hull bristled with weapons that could turn Earth's entire fleet into space dust. Jake had served in the Earth Navy for 15 years and commanded the Liberty for the last 5, but he had never faced odds like these. His ship carried a crew of 200 brave men and women who believed they were here to secure humanity's place among the galactic powers. They had no idea what they were really walking into. The docking process took 20 minutes, and Jake felt every second drag by like an hour. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Ben Clark, monitored the alien ships around them and reported constant weapon locks from at least 6 different vessels. The message was clear without words, and humanity was not welcome here. Ambassador Barnes gathered her diplomatic team in the main conference room before they left the ship, and Jake could see the determination in her eyes despite the impossible situation. She had spent her entire career preparing for first contact scenarios, and now she faced the greatest challenge in human history. The aliens had agreed to hear humanity's petition for membership in the Galactic Council, but the early signs suggested this would not go well. Chief Warrant Officer Amy Torres ran final systems checks on the Liberty's defensive systems, and Jake knew she was thinking the same thing he was. If this meeting went wrong, they might not make it home to warn Earth about what was coming. The ship's experimental core hummed quietly in the lower decks, and Jake wondered once again why the scientists had insisted on installing such an unusual power source for what should have been a simple diplomatic mission. The walk through the space station's corridors felt like a march to execution, and Jake stayed close to Ambassador Barnes as they made their way to the council chambers. Alien beings of every shape and size watched them pass, and Jake heard what sounded like laughter from several different species. The universal translators built into their suits picked up fragments of conversation, and none of it sounded friendly. The council chamber itself was a vast, circular room with seating for representatives from dozens of different worlds, and Jake felt very small as they took their assigned places near the back. The Kethran delegation sat in the place of honor at the center of the room, and their leader, Admiral Vextar, commanded attention simply by existing. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall with scaled skin that gleamed under the chamber lights, and his 4 arms moved with practiced grace as he reviewed data tablets. Admiral Vextar had ruled the Kethran military for over 2 centuries, and his empire controlled nearly half the known galaxy. When he spoke, the chamber fell silent and even. The most powerful alien leader showed him respect. Jake realized that humanity was about to face the most dangerous being in the galaxy, with nothing but words and hope. The session began with formal introductions, and Ambassador Barnes presented humanity's petition with all the dignity she could manage. She spoke of Earth's desire for peaceful coexistence and trade partnerships, while Jake watched the alien faces around the room. Most showed boredom or mild amusement, and few seemed to take the human delegation seriously. When Ambassador C. Barnes finished her presentation, Admiral Vextar rose from his seat, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority when he finally spoke, and the universal translators made his words crystal clear to the humans. Admiral Vextar called humanity a race of primitives who had barely mastered chemical propulsion, and suggested they return to their small world before they embarrassed themselves further. He spoke of the Kethran Empire's 1,000-year reign over the galaxy and questioned why the Council should waste time on such an insignificant species. The other alien delegates murmured agreement, and Jake felt his heart sink as their mission collapsed before it had truly begun. Ambassador Barnes tried to respond, but Admiral Vextar cut her off with a gesture that brooked no argument. He declared that humanity had exactly 72 hours to abandon all star systems beyond Earth, or face what he called cleansing. The word sent chills through Jake's spine, and he knew they were looking at the face of genocide. The Zalani trade. Representative actually laughed when Admiral Vextar finished speaking and began taking bets with other delegates on how long the human fleet would last against Kethran forces. The warrior Brutax showed more respect, but even they seemed amused by humanity's predicament. Jake realized that not a single alien in the chamber considered humans a threat worth worrying about. Ambassador Barnes requested a private meeting with Admiral Vextar, but the Kethran leader dismissed the idea with contempt. He suggested that humans spend their remaining time preparing final messages for their families because the Kethran fleet would show no mercy to primitives who refused to know their place. The session ended with formal dissolution of humanity's petition, and Jake felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on his shoulders. The walk back to the Liberty felt even longer than the journey to the council chambers, and Jake could hear alien laughter following them through the corridors. Lieutenant Clark's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth, and Chief Torres muttered curses in 3 different languages. Ambassador Barnes maintained her diplomatic composure until they reached the ship, but Jake could see the defeat in her eyes. As they prepared to depart the station, Jake looked back at the massive alien fleet surrounding them and wondered if this would be the last time any human saw the Galactic Council headquarters. The UES Liberty undocked from the station and began its journey back toward Earth while Jake tried to figure out how to tell his homeworld that they had just been sentenced to death by beings who considered them less than insects. The stars looked different now as Jake set course for home, and he realized that everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe had just changed forever.